tactics.
Minister.
I congratulate the Honourable Member for Romsey for securing this debate, and also it's clear from the attendance in the Chamber today what anxiety and outrage these decisions have caused for Right Honourable and Honourable Members throughout the country, as IBM is a large employer, and clearly there are many colleagues on all sides of the House who are here today precisely to express their worries and pass on the feelings of the constituents that they represent about what IBM has chosen to do. And I think that even in this short debate, the level of that outrage and sense of injustice has certainly been communicated. I have to say that, firstly, as Minister for Pensions, I've received a number of letters about the proposed changes to IBM's pension scheme, and I know it's an issue that has caused upset and outrage and worry up and down the country. I think, Mrs Dean, it's always disappointing when an organisation such as IBM decides to close its final salary pension scheme to future accruals. This, of course, does remain a matter for IBM to work through with the trustees and its employee members of its scheme, and it would be inappropriate for me to comment in detail on the IBM case, especially as the Honourable Member for Romsey pointed out. The trustees are currently going before the courts to seek clarification, if I could put it that way, on some aspects of the, particularly I understand the early redundancy rights and how they impact on the scheme. I'm not privy directly to the company's specific proposals, and I wouldn't expect to be, but I note that IBM US appears to be pursuing a similar policy. Only IBM, Mrs Dean, can comment on their motivation for making the changes, and I'm certainly not about to try to answer for the company. But I must say I sympathise with the IBM pension scheme members. I do understand the anxieties that arise for members when these sorts of events occur. Some employees' future financial situations, as I think has been hinted by all honourable members who've made contributions, however short, to this debate, and particularly the honourable member for Romsey, who has initiated it, have suddenly changed quite dramatically, and it's quite clear that some employees are now facing some difficult choices that they hadn't anticipated having to face. Nevertheless, while disappointing, the changes IBM has made to its final pension scheme are for it to defend, and I certainly will not try to do so. However, I only hope that the IBM board will be watching this debate and taking note of the reaction that their decisions have provoked, albeit expressed not directly but indirectly through those representing the views of their constituents in this place. This government believes that all workers should have access to workplace pension saving, which is why we continue to make good progress with our plans to introduce automatic enrolment from 2012. Honourable members may wish to note that the government published a suite of 10 sets of draft regulations and orders which combine to help deliver pension reform and the National Employment Savings Trust, which will now be the new low-cost and simple pension scheme for employers to use, formerly known as personal accounts. For decades now, though, with respect to defined benefit schemes, Mrs Dean, employers have been moving away from them and switching to defined contribution schemes. Membership of defined benefit schemes peaked in the 1960s when I was still at school, and it's been in decline ever since, so this isn't a new phenomenon. Nor do I believe there is any one magic bullet. I will in a minute when I've just finished this observation. Mrs Dean, I don't believe there's any one magic bullet or government action which will reverse this trend on its own. But this does not mean that I'm not open to consider suggestions that will help. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. What I think is clear for what's going on here is the way in which the company is using the pension scheme to encourage people to leave early and loading the costs of that, which would normally be picked up in a voluntary redundancy scheme, effectively onto the pension fund. does she not agree that this shows that the legislative framework is not adequate to protect people in pension schemes from this sort of behaviour? And what does she intend to do about it?
Minister.
Well, I don't think it's unusual for companies to retain significant discretion over early retirement, both for cost and manpower planning purposes. That's been a phenomenon which we've seen for many years, and I hope the honourable gentleman doesn't think I'm condoning what IBM have done. I'm making a general observation in this particular area. It's often more of a company human resources issue than a pension scheme issue. If he wants to give me details that he thinks make that case, I'm happy to look to see whether there are public policy implications. But I think it's important to realise that there has to be some flexibility, and not all flexibility is written into the rules of pension schemes. Quite often it's available so long as there are surpluses in the scheme that can be used for these purposes. Now, in the past, many employers and employees have benefited from the flexibility that that kind of procedure has offered if downsizing happens to be the case. And I think we have to be careful that we don't react with understandable emotion to what's happened here and end up throwing out the baby with the bathwater in terms of flexibilities. But as I say, I'm happy to have a look if he's got things that he thinks impact directly in this area. I'm happy to give way.
I
appreciate the Minister giving way. She's been generous with her time. Further to the point that was just made, would the Minister agree with the constituent of mine who emailed me to say that IBM has used these changes to force current employees over 50 into a Hobson's choice of either taking early retirement now or risking the massively worse impact of early retirement penalties in the future? This is really redundancy by stealth. It's not about flexibility, it's redundancy by stealth. And there clearly is a loophole in the current legislation that needs to be addressed.
Minister.
Well, I think only IBM can comment on their motivation for making the changes, and I do sympathise with IBM employees who found themselves in this situation. Indeed, the Honourable Lady, the member for Romsey, and I want to address some of her points because this is, after all, her debate, has asked whether this is age discrimination, and my only observation on that is that it depends on the exact circumstances, and the way to test whether this is age discrimination has got to be to look at testing it through industrial tribunals. But it's a bit difficult to be more to make more of a general observation than that on the proceedings. But it may be that some of the members of the IBM pension scheme, or indeed their trade union, may wish to think about whether the resort to the industrial tribunals is to test whether age discrimination is an issue here, is something that should be considered.
Jim Cunningham.
Coming back to the point that was made earlier, I would have thought, though, that the Minister could look at the principle of redundancies being funded out of pension schemes. I think that's something that should have been addressed a long, long time ago, and I know there's a lot of anger in the trade union movement about that particular principle. Now, I know you've got to have flexibility and all that sort of stuff, but I think that at least the Minister could say she's going to look at that element.
Minister.
Well, again, I think that one of the jobs of a pensions minister is to look to see how things are developing out there, and always to check whether the circumstances and the rules and regulations that we have are fit for purpose with respect to developing practice. And I'm more than happy and always have an open mind about these things.